I was just really into looking for the cartoons throughout the paper, and that just made me a real big newspaper fan. To this day, you know, I drive my family crazy by bringing newspapers home all the time and just go through all of them because it's just something I grew up on.
Right, and so what were some of the strips that you liked?
That I liked. I mean, you know, back in the day, it was, I mean, just Peanuts was it.
Peanuts was it?
Yeah, Peanuts.
Did you read any comic books by chance? I mean,
I really didn't. I mean, I read comic collections of Charlie Brown, but I also remember going to my library and they only had 2 cartoon books, which were Charlie Brown and Doonesbury. And what fascinated me about Doonesbury is clearly they were mixing in stuff that was going on and present day, and I think that's where I got the idea of mixing in true life stuff with imaginary stuff. And so, and Doonesbury really was the first cartoon that showed me black characters that were black characters. They weren't just a character that seemed just like everybody else, except they were black. I remember one early Doonesbury book where one of the black characters knocked on Doonesbury's door and said, "Hey, can you give to the local Black Panther, campus Black Panther party?" And they're like, "No, man, I'm pretty empty today." And then other guys are like, "No, I can't do it." So then the kid writes a little X on Doonesbury's door, knocks up, and they're like, "I don't know, this doesn't look too good." But I just thought that was really funny.
All right, it was the subtlety in there.
Yeah. And but just that, I remember that really stuck out in my head. But I remember reading, obviously, Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine was a huge influence on me. And then, but back in the day, you know, it was Bloom County was huge. Well, this is what I loved, was leaving my house and going to my Uncle Owen's house, and he had the Boston Herald. And in there was all these other cartoons that were not in the Globe. So that's where I saw Maury Turner Wheat House.
I was going to ask about Wheat House.
Yeah, and then, I forget this one. It was, I think the lead, it was called Moose or something. It was just a family that lived in squalor. There was like trash all over the place. Like, it was a Moose Miller. It was just like trash everywhere, garbage, and like fish bones and everything. And I was just really fascinated by that. But also my Uncle Owen was he was an artist, and he used to point to me. There was one panel where it was a couple that were always fighting all the time. And the way it was drawn is their heads would always float just above their bodies, like they weren't connected, and he would always point that out, like, see how that head just floats. And so those little things, and learning the language, because the first language I think we all learn is the language of cartooning. Who teaches you how to read a comic strip? No one does, right? We just like sort of learn that it's left to right, and that, you know, this is a word balloon, and then this one with the circles is a dot bubble. And, you know, if there's little lines, that means they're shaping. Like, you learn that. I think it's like the first language we all learn. And so it's really a neat thing to sort of continually pick up. That's how you pick up the skills.
Yeah, sure.
You see something you've never seen before, like, wow, I like the way they do that. And you incorporate. And that's how to this day, I see cartoons and go, I want to do it like that. I want to do it like that. You know, I still learn what to do and what not to do with cartoons. But, you know, really, the newspaper cartoons, Jules Pfeiffer on Sundays, seeing Pfeiffer's stuff, the fact that he didn't use panels, I love that. Chuck Jones, Warner Brothers cartoons, that's a huge influence.
Daffy Duck?
Yeah, Daffy Duck.
Or Bugs Bunny? Or both?
I am a Daffy Duck person, because Daffy Duck can play both the protagonist, he can play the good guy and the bad guy, like he's very versatile. Although I really like it the few times, and I don't like early Bugs Bunny. I'm trying to explain it to my son about early Bugs Bunny to, because early Bugs Bunny was very irritating, and you wanted him to get, you know, caught or blasted. But it's the later cross-dressing Bugs Bunny. Right? So you want to be the cool cross-dressing Bugs Bunny. And all of those he was put upon.
You know, when you watch those little bunny cartoons, he wasn't the one making the first move. Someone else came along and annoyed him.
That's true. But there are a couple where he's a little slightly, the Robert McKimson ones, where one time they were posting up the bounties for different animals, and I think rabbits got 2 cents, and he got really mad, and he came to Washington, and went to the game warden or something. He said, "How come bunnies are only 2 cents?" And he said, "They're really harmless bunnies." And he's like, "I'll show you." And then he goes and he saws off Florida and lets him float out to the air. That's the Bugs Bunny you want to be. But yeah, just running. But I love that, and I'll tell you this: those folks who grew up in Warner Brothers cartoons have a literacy that generations after don't have. And I would say the only thing that equates it, and here's why: because Chuck Jones would take, like a Wagner's Opus, the opera, and then put, kill the rabbit, and you're learning something, but you don't realize you're learning something, and that's what I loved about those cartoons. And it's the same thing. I will say this: hip hop does the same thing. The golden age of hip hop. If you listen to all the samples, all the different samples, that the music they turn you on to and the turn of phrases is very similar. So I am so lucky to have come up when Warner Brothers cartoons were big and hip hop was big, because that is what really fuels the idea of all this stuff that I put into my comics. You may not get all the references, but like later on you might be like, "Oh wow, that's what he was talking about." That's what I love about any piece of art, is when you're figuring out, "Oh, that's what that means." That's what, getting that stuff. And I just want to say how proud I am of my son Julian, who made this little print of Louise Parks. I didn't know Rosa Parks' middle name was Louis. I'm sorry, Louis. Is this true, Julian? Is this Rosa Parks' middle name? Okay, it is now. So I'm very proud of that. But yeah, so I always say I was raised on a steady diet of Star Wars, racism, and Warner Brothers cartoons. But the bigger thing is is hip hop and just all the different influences of just the media and what I grew up on. I try to channel into my work.
And so when did you start putting pen or pencil or crayon to paper? And
I think we all do when we're little kids, and we're always encouraged until you get to school. And then I was always continually encouraged, but I think when someone starts saying, "Oh, look at this," and they're not doing it to yours, you get a little discouraged because they're always putting up somebody else's stuff. But I was always encouraged to do it until I got into the upper grades. And then my art teachers were trying to discourage me from doing it, which is really weird. But they said, "You should get into medical stuff." They didn't take comics seriously at all.
And back then they didn't. A lot of them still don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
And the people that did encourage me were my English professors. They were the ones who encouraged me to do it. And I had a great high school teacher who allowed me, instead of doing a regular book report, we read the book Animal Farm, and I did a comic book report on Animal Farm. He allowed me to do a comic book report. So I did a comic book parody of Animal Farm. So I don't know if you're familiar with Animal Farm, but George Orwell, farm animals take over a farm, kick out all the humans, they have 4 legs, they make up laws. 4 legs are good, 2 legs are bad. So I had me and my friends take over the high school and kick out all the adults. And we said, under 18 good, over 18 bad. And I did parodies of all caricatures of my high school teachers, and also making fun of all these kids in class. And my teacher was so excited that he kept it in the teacher's lounge to show the teachers. And I thought everyone was gonna get me, but everyone was just happy that they were in it.
Yeah.
Even if I was making fun of it, which is, I was like, wow, like if I could do this for a living, make fun of people for a living and not get beat up, that was gonna be my thing. And he wrote A+ question, captured the essence of Animal Farm perfectly, but more importantly, you should be doing a syndicated comic strip. So that was the first time I heard syndicated comic strip, and so it got me looking into syndicates and all that type of stuff. But the other big change I had was with a teacher. It wasn't until I was a junior in college, and then when I was
Where did you go to college, and what was your major at the time?
Salem State College, and now it's university.
Don't you have some kind of special address that you're doing now? Tell everybody about that.
I just got invited by Salem State University to do their 2020 commencement in May, so I'm returning. Every time I say it, I go like this. I don't know what I'm going to say, but it's going to be like this. I told you all. No, I don't know. No, but I was a graphic designer. There were no cartooning classes, and it was just a regular state school. And but
This would have been the mid-'80s at that.
mid-'80s, and it graduated 2 award-winning syndicated cartoonists. Mark Parisi of Off the Mark is from there too. So people go there thinking that there's some fancy cartoon program there. There's nothing there. So they always give them my number, and then people say what did you take? But I took graphic design because that's all. And my parents started worrying at this time that I was serious about cartoons.
I was going to ask you your parents' response to all of this.
So they started going, ooh, there's no money in cartooning. And they were right. But it was too late by this time. So I was going hardcore. And so I did it for my local newspaper. The campus newspaper.
Oh, so you worked on the campus newspaper?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And, I did posters for local bands and events and stuff like that. But I had a teacher. I had my first black teacher in college. And there was a study that came out last year or 2 years ago that black students have a 30 to 30, their chance of going to college goes up 30 to 35% when they have one black teacher in the first 12 years of school. The first 12 years of school. And so I can't tell you how important it was to have this black teacher, because he was an American literature teacher, and he assigned us Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, who else? Ralph Ellison, yeah. And when someone said, why are you giving us all black writers? He said, I'm giving you all American writers. And so when I heard that, my heavens, right, sure is. When we learn American writers, you think of Mark Twain. And he was basically he was working within the system to subvert the system. And so I thought that was just amazing. And I loved that class. And he gave me an A-, even though I deserved an A. But he was a great teacher, and he really sparked. It made me say, okay, when I do this cartoon, I'm going to do it from the perspective of a black male. And some of the stuff that everyone's going to get, some of the stuff only a few people are going to get, but it's going to be distinctly from that perspective.
And so once you left college, was that the point that you went down to San Francisco, or was there a delay? And then once you got to San Francisco, what did you do to further your comics income?
Well, there was no delay. I worked in Faneuil Hall in Boston, drawing caricatures, and it was a great job, because you sat, you just drew comics, but you also heard everybody's accent, and so you're like, oh my God, the Boston accent is the worst. That's why, if I have a few beers and the socks are on, then it comes back. But I got rid of it then. But we had one artist, Dale Stefanos, who's this amazing illustrator, and he would get all the good jobs. So those jobs would have him travel around the country. And he went to San Francisco, and then when he came back, he was like, He's like, you got to check out San Francisco. He said, it's like, he described it like a big, it's like Harvard Square, but it's the whole city. You know? So I was like, all right, I'm going. And so I worked really hard, saved up money for the summer, and then just jumped in a car and drove out there. And I thought I was going to be there for 5 years. I stayed there for 16. I met my lovely wife, and we basically, that is really the birthplace of sort of underground cartooning in the States. You know?
Right, that's where Robert Crumb started, selling Zap out of a baby carriage. Is the story. Okay.
Yeah. And so literally, I would be there doing my zines, and I would.
Was that the mini comics?
Yeah, the mini comics. You'd go to FedEx. Well, back in the day, it was called Kinko's. And it's funny because we were just talking about this today. I used to go there, and there used to be like, these crazy like 50-year-old guys like running off their manifestos and like stapling them together. And then, I realized today I am that guy. I'm the guy that someone looks at and says like, "What's that guy?" Yeah. So, I'm that guy. So I used to put the zines together, and there were a lot of good places to sell them in. But I used to wear a sandwich board. And sell them. And Golden Gate Park, I would sell them at the San Francisco Book Fair. I remember going with my cousin to New York and being on the subway with a sandwich board. And people either thought we were undercover police officers or just, I don't know what they thought, but I would have a really fun time.
And you did like 10 of those?
I think I did 10 of those, but I mean, seriously, like just doing zines, I ended up, there was a German filmmaker, I have all these different connections to Germany, and not just married to a German, but this German filmmaker wrote to me and said, hey, can I develop your cartoon into a short film? I said, yeah, sure, just spell my name right in the credits. I didn't think it was a real thing. But he created a short film called Jetzt kommt ein Cartoon. And it won some award and some Lunin Fest, and it was supposed to show at the Castro for the Berlin and Beyond Film Festival, but there was something that prevented it from showing there. But I'm going to try to get the rights to it, to put it on a TV in the TV show. So there are all these Easter eggs in the show that are going to be in, that people who know me from my childhood will be like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that.
Well, before we get to the show, so you're doing the zines.
Yeah.
How did you get into the old weekly world?
The alt week, yeah. So I remember I ran like in local color. The very first strip that was ever run in the local newspaper was it was a review of a Beastie Boys show that I did, and it was the Beastie Boys, and then they had two unknown bands opening for them, and one was I forget the first one, but the other one was a very unknown band called Cypress Hill. This was just when they were starting, and I remember someone trying to break into the club by climbing through the window of the bathroom, and I'd written about that, and I'd ripped on the bouncers, made fun of them and everything, and people loved it. People went nuts, and so then I got an inquiry from the SF Weekly about it, but then something happened where they weren't in contact with me for a long time, and then the guy who called me became the editor. And here's what I did: is I taped a $10 bill to a letter with my cartoons in it, and I sent it to him, and I said, "Don't spend it all in one place." And I got in the next week. So I'm telling you, bribery does work. I'm in Washington, so I don't need to say it.
Now, it's very interesting what you're saying, because I've spoken to other people who got in the old weekly world, and unlike going through a syndicate, you actually had to do all the hustling yourself. You had to contact the papers, and so tell us about that process.
Yeah, well, this is why, this is our moment as the Republic crumbles. It's the ones that have always struggled when you're an indie cartoonist and you're everything, you're the accountant, you're the business person, you're the creator, you're the press person, you do all the hype stuff to, you do everything. So you're completely prepared for it. So yeah, we have to send out portfolios to everybody and then follow up, and then like you have to invoice people, which my family knows I'm very slow at that, and just you do all that hustle stuff. So when newspapers started to crumble, I went to an editorial cartoonist convention, hoping to like glean some knowledge from all these elder statesmen, and they were coming to me because they were like, "Hey, I've been working at this place for 30 years. They just let me go. I don't know how to do Photoshop. I don't know how to do, like, how do you do what you do?" And so I was just like, "Oh my God, if they're coming to me, then we're doomed. We're on to it." So it was just really surprising. So everybody who struggled in the alt weekly market are somehow making it work now because they figured it out, somehow, some way. And it's ways like through Patreon, which is this great subscription service for people. If you want to subscribe to my work, you can go through that. Or they'll do, I do college slideshows. They go on the road and do that. They get TV shows, or somehow, some way. No, but there's all these different ways that people have somehow been able to make it work and continue to create what they create. And so I was very, very fortunate. I'll just say quickly. I grew my, the alternative weekly market. Then it started to collapse and crumble.
Craigslist came in and
and it's
consolidation.
The guy who started Craigslist, I used to see at the Office Depot where I used to make copies, and we used to see each other all the time. So if I took him out right there, then none of this would happen. I don't encourage that.
So now, how did Think come to be in K Chronicles and the differences between those two?
So the K Chronicles was the autobiographical strip that I started. I first did an autobiographical strip when I was in junior high about a food fight, and no one got it right, the story right, so I decided to set the record straight and do this comic strip. And that was the very first one, and it developed into a regular strip, and that was a daily size back in the day. And then when I got to San Francisco and saw alternative comics and how big they were, I made it the size of Matt Groening's Life in Hell. So that's how it got the 9-panel size. So I was doing that, doing well, and then I was approached by Africana.com to do a strip for them. They wanted an autobiographical strip, and I was like, I'm not going to do the same thing. So I said, I want to take instead of autobiographical, I want to take it from the news. Instead of a multi-panel, I want to do it as a single panel. And so I went in there. I remember drawing my first ink strip on a bar napkin, and it was Denny's. It was a Denny's strip, a Denny's sign that says, "Serving blacks since 1997. I got the gig. It was just funny. I still have that little bar napkin, so if you'd like to buy it, you can. But it was what I didn't realize is if you take Think, all you have to do, Think is Knight spelled backwards without the G. And I didn't realize that until 15 years later when I was just staring at it. I was like, wow, it's just such a weird thing because I never realized that until you stare at a blank page for a long time. But so Think came about in about 1999, and that just took off.
Because I remember you coming to SPX first time. I've got one book from SPX 1998. When did you start going to these alternative comics festivals and things like that?
Oh, I've always gone. I first went to Comic-Con in San Diego in '93. But whenever there were new alt comic cons
and things
like that, stuff, I was always going from the beginning. And it's just I am a people person. Being a cartoonist is probably the worst thing for me because I don't like sitting by myself in a little cave and drawing things. You know,
You go out to a coffee shop.
I go to a coffee shop, I will sit in a lobby, I will sit, any sort of stimulation that like, I just can't sit, like, I need something going on. So, to others, like, it's probably like, how can you do this? But I saw this article once that said, like even a little bit of cafe noise is actually better for your mind to concentrate.
And so what, to get technical for a minute, okay? So you're still ink on paper. And so, what kind of paper do you like? What kind of pen nibs for all the pen nib geeks out there? And
Jasper, can you grab my equipment out of the bag there? So I use micron pigments, markers, but I think I actually found an alternative because microns, I think their quality has fallen off a little bit. And
this happens. I've heard other creatives talk about how supplies they've been using, whether it's ink or nibs, what have you, just has fallen off in quality.
Yeah. So this, you see these micron pigments all over the place, but in places like Michael's and stuff like that. So I've just found these Prismacolors that are similar, and these are far more inky, and they're far, I think, higher quality, at least for now. When they take off, then they'll get bad again. But also, I used to do these rub-it-up laundry markers that are made by Sharpie, but they're white instead of this gray, but they don't make them anymore. I don't know what happened, but we used to use them all the time during caricatures, so that's how I got used to them. So now I use Sharpies, which I don't really want to use them, but I don't know, it's just like, what can I say?
And you do pencils first, then you ink, and then you scan in.
Yeah, Jasper, you want to grab one of my pads? I think there's a pad in there. So yeah, I still do it on, yeah, there it is. There's a Bristol. I still use Strathmore Bristol, and let's see what's in here right now. Ooh, look, there's one of the latest K Chronicles. So this is the size I do it, and I don't do the K Chronicles anymore in 9 panels, just because the Sharpies are so thick, and I'm trying to do it on this smaller paper. I'm trying to save trees, honestly. I'm trying to save trees. But this is the size I do it in, and then it fits on my scanner, and get that down. Think obviously is smaller, so it's a little easier. I do have some artwork here from the show, but I can't show you it because then it would give away part of the stuff.
Well, and actually that's a good lead-in. So you did Nightlife, and that got syndicated. You here in Washington Post.
Okay, so why did I do the Nightlife? This is probably what most people are familiar with. Sorry. For years and years, syndicates have bugged me to do a daily strip, and I would say, nah, I'm in a band. I'm making no money in a band, so why would I make no money doing a daily strip? So finally, we saw the writing on the wall. We were in San Francisco, and I didn't want to be. You saw that San Francisco was changing, and
It's a really different place.
Oh, it totally is. And I didn't want to be stuck. We were in a great rent controlled apartment. We had like a 3-bedroom, and it was like $1,500, I think, what it was. We were sitting pretty, but I didn't want to be stuck there. And I didn't want to be like the bitter San Francisco, man, this used to be cool back in the day, that type of thing. So we took off for LA, much to everyone's
right.
Chagrin. Like everyone's horrified. Color City, yeah. Color City. And we got down there, and we didn't have a car, did we? You had to use stick shift, right? But I can't drive a stick shift, so I didn't have a car for 3 years down there, which is you can't do it. You can't do it. You can actually do it now better because there's a subway there now. But we were down there because I wanted to try to develop something for television, and we had Jasper, and I realized I have to make some money, so I have to go for it. So I launched a daily strip in the worst year in newspaper history, which is 2008. That's when the bottom fell out, and I thought I was in all these papers, and then I was not in any of these papers. And it was So 11 years, I had 9 deadlines. And it was, it was great working in the format of it, the challenge of it, like trying to work in this small space. And I loved sort of creating the new characters for it and doing all, like I love the daily format, but it is a grind that, back in the day, you could get into automatically papers almost.
Right, and I was going to say, these days, the syndicates don't give you the support that they used to give it.
They can't afford it because there aren't that many newspapers, and so they can't afford all these salespeople going all over the place. And literally, part of the deal is newspapers are so old-fashioned that they literally, like, there were papers that wouldn't run the strip because there was a mixed-race couple in the strip.
Right.
Like, there
And
is...
they were in the 21st century.
Yeah. So, like, it's hardly newspapers' fault that newspapers are, because there's something that newspapers do that the internet can't do, which is, I think, with the internet, you get distracted by stuff and you follow the little shaking bikini in the corner. But with a newspaper, you look at everything. So when you turn a page, you have an opportunity to really do something really neat with like the layout and design, but also people read they look at everything in there. And I just think that you could design a paper, and McSweeney's did a version of what they thought would be a good newspaper. And it was full of comics and color and all this different stuff. And that's the way newspapers should try to move forward. But, with the way our laws are, you just basically have these corporations buying these papers and not really caring about them, firing everybody and just putting the same content everywhere. So it's a lost cause. I think comics are one of the few things that are inexpensive, that you can put in there, that are unique, that will bring people to paper.
And that used to be not only the result of interest for comic strips way back in the day when they had the comic strip wars, but also the old weekly papers. They brought in the comics and they would put them in the classified sections.
Yeah.
To be sure that people want their classifieds to go ahead and read them. So.
And that's the first thing that they cut on the cartoons. And like literally, they still pay $25 per week, like cartoons in a paper. They pay the same as they paid 2 decades ago, if you're lucky. So it's insane. It's insane. Being a cartoonist today, I mean, thank goodness for the internet. Like that's the way to go, because all you need to do is cultivate your group of people, and they will support you. If they like your work, they will support you.
So we're sort of running short of time, so here's the question. Do you want to do some of the presentation, or do you want to take some questions?
Oh, well, why don't we take questions and a presentation at the same time? And speaking of support, boys, this is your time. They wouldn't allow me to sell any books or prints or anything in there unless I went through it was a nightmare trying to set it up. So I'm going to have my sons pass out these cards to you. So if you guys are interested in my books or my prints or bringing me to your school I do this slideshow on racial illiteracy, which I think is the country's biggest problem. And it uses humor and storytelling, but it's a very serious thing. But I do it all over the place. I just did VCU and Richmond.
And you've been doing this for a while in terms of having this, your slideshow, go into colleges and universities and talk about race. What are some of the experiences you've had there?
Oh, it's been amazing. Again, I am a person who likes to go out and sit and talk with people and present and stuff. And so I figured if no one under 50 is going to read my comics in the paper, I'm going to bring it to them in person. So I've been doing all these colleges all over the country, and I've done them overseas too. I've done a bunch of colleges in Germany and Saint, I can't remember where it was, but anyway, it's been amazing. And people, I mean, similar stories all over the place. There's just, we continue to do some of the things, are heartbreaking, where, kids are going to school for the first time and they're just telling me their experiences about, like really, their experiences with racism for the first time. You know, people in blackface and doing all this bizarre stuff, and I remember there were these two older women sitting in the middle of one I did in Chicago, and they came up to me and said, when we were students in the 70s, we sat in those same seats and listened to the exact same presentation, 50 years later or 40 years later, because we learned nothing about, when people say, oh, Black History Month, we learned nothing about Black history in this country. Nothing. We learned the same 4 or 5 feel-good stories, and the majority of the history of Black people in this country is a harsh, horrible history of a nation that has been built on the backs of enslaved people. And what I do in my slideshow is really explain to people, what could you build if you had 250 years of free labor? What sort of business could you build? What sort of nation could you build? And the fact that we take the time, we take about a paragraph in a history book and talk about it is absurd. We know that the generation, the descendants of people that were in the Holocaust, survivors of the Holocaust, have higher degrees of depression and of suicide because they carry that trauma genetically. So what do you think is carried within the descendants of people who were enslaved for 250 years and then 100 years of Jim Crow? And how could you possibly imagine that 50 years of affirmative action, 8 years of a Black president is gonna wipe out 300, 400 years of oppression? Like, we know that when you break something, it's a lot quicker to break something than it is to fix something. And I use my comics and my storytelling and my statistics and facts to explain that if we just examine the history, everything that's going on right now, with who's in the White House right now, with what's going on with voter suppression right now, police brutality, the disparity between wealth and white families and Black families, all that will be explained if we just examine the history.
And down in Texas, they have the school books that they have down there. They go ahead and they give it about that much. Different states have different ways of doing that. But even the high school yearbooks in some states they purposely downgraded.
Oh, believe me, after moving to the South and hearing sort of the stories. Yeah, listen, no, I'm going to defend that. I've learned more about the Black experience moving to the South in the 5 years than I've ever learned growing up in Massachusetts or in California. Because what happens is, and this happens all over the country, we are fed what I call pop music history. Christopher Columbus is pop music history, okay? Jackie Robinson being the first Black to play professional baseball, like in mainstream baseball, is pop music history. Blacks and whites played in the 1800s, That is a result, and whites kicked blacks out of baseball up until Jackie Robinson got back in. But Christopher Columbus, in his own words, does not deserve a holiday named after him. If you read the first 10 pages of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, which gives you the U.S. history from the perspective of enslaved people, indigenous people, Mexican, Chinese, in his own words, he will explain to you why he does not deserve a holiday. That's the pop music history. And when I say pop music, you know how you hear, Taylor Swift's music, even though you don't seek it out? It's just forced upon you. Yeah. Okay. Now, if you want to hear the good music, you do what I say is called digging in the crates. That's a hip hop term. You go dig in the crates. You search. You go down to the left of the dial. You listen to it. You go to the clubs. You find out the obscure music. You need to dig for the real history of this country. It's not going to be fed to you. The thing that's going to be fed to you is the stuff that is not right, is myth. But the real stuff, if you dig, it's an ugly history, but it's a history, for me, when I find out what went on in like Stagville, one of the biggest plantations in Durham in the South, when I learned that the folks there were able to create the largest agricultural building in the South at that time, with no nails, with no plans, just created from the skills that they taught themselves. There's a pride there that I didn't have before, that like just makes you say, oh my God, like we are descended from the most powerful, the people that survived going from the Middle Passage, because a lot of people died then. The people that made it there were the strongest, or most resilient people, and we are descendants of that. And so once you put it that way, I think people understand, like, seriously, like, this was built by us, you know? And so for people to just diminish it, like, oh, slavery was a long time ago. I always get a shock when I say this, but when people say, oh, that was a long time ago, get over it, it was a long time ago. I say Jesus was a long time ago. No one getting over that. So, I think just people need to understand, like, this stuff needs to be worded in a different way. Thomas Jefferson, his, what did he call it? His mistress?
Sally.
Yeah. This was not a mistress. This was a person that he owned.
Right.
Okay, that wasn't considered a human being. And when people say that Barack Obama becoming president is a black accomplishment, to me that's a white accomplishment, because there have been plenty of black people that were capable of being president of the United States. This was the first time white people were able to bring themselves to vote for a black person. And so it's a white accomplishment. And I need people to understand that the success of black people in this country is a success for all Americans. And so it's in everyone's best interest. One of the things, we homeschool our kids, and we live in a place where they tax a lot higher. The property taxes are a lot higher because of the school system. It's a fancy schmancy school system. People always say, why do you live there? Like, and why do you homeschool when you pay those taxes? Like, I wouldn't live there. This is like, why wouldn't I want my neighbors to be better educated? Why wouldn't I want my taxes to go to a better educational system? Like, I would rather them be smart and successful, then they won't come and rob me, you know? It's just like this idea that, like, I have mine and I don't want, everyone else needs to get it. Like, it's just so silly. It's so silly.
There's a lack of concept of common good.
Common good and empathy.
Yes.
And empathy in a way that, like, someone else's, that person outside who's homeless is our problem. It's not their problem. It's not a, bring yourself up by your bootstraps type of thing. Because black people didn't have bootstraps in this country. You can't, like, bring yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have it. I talk about the wealth and how the wealth is built with all the low-cost mortgages that were given to this country. They weren't given to black people. So whites were able to build wealth by buying their first house, like in the 30s up until the 60s. Black people didn't get that.
Well, the redlining.
Redlining.
Yeah.
That's how ghettos were formed. People need to know that. Once they know that, they realize, oh, okay, like, it's not, there's a system in place. And when people,
I used to build houses, okay? And
Yeah.
so one of the houses that I bought, they gave me the covenants to the house from the early 1900s. And it said I was not allowed to sell that house to anybody of the Negroid or Semitic races.
yeah.
They're unenforceable, but that was the document.
But yeah, I mean, they're unenforceable, but they are they are forced. I mean, obviously, like when people say, "Oh, we don't have quotas," police don't have quotas, they don't have this, they don't have that. It's all. And people say, "Well, what do you have to? Why do you have to bring about race for everything?" It's like I didn't make race about everything. White people made race about everything. And like literally, every aspect of our lives is affected by that. From the restaurant you go in, if you look to the back to the front. It gets darker as it goes back. Like everyone who works in the back is darker. Everyone who works in the front is lighter. Like in every aspect, when a person goes to get a car, black people are charged an average of $700 more for any car. Like and getting a loan and all like every aspect of everything. I could give you. You could say any innocuous thing, and I will tell you. I'm gonna spoil Antiques Roadshow for you. Antiques Roadshow. You watch that on PBS. You try to find somebody black coming up and going, "Oh, my uncle, my great uncle went to China, brought this jade thing back." Black people couldn't own a thing before 1960. And I'm just joking about that. But literally, it is a celebration of like white cultural plunder. Like it's people going, "Oh, we got this from the Sioux, blah blah blah," and it's just like, yeah, okay. Like how many people did your uncle wipe out for that? Just like it's total celebration of exploitation. And so.
All right, so why don't we stop and take some questions? Okay, no.
You got me ranting.
No. We were here to listen to you.
All right. Okay. So we didn't even look at any comics, right?
No, we didn't look at any comics.
Okay. Would you like to look at comics while we answer questions? Why don't we do that really quick?
All right.
Okay. All right. So these are. You notice something?
Anybody with questions, go ahead and raise their hand.
So this is one of my favorite ones, which isn't even a drawing. The All Lives Matter, restrictions apply, see skin color for details. It works as a sticker. It doesn't work as a shirt. I tried doing it as a shirt, and people don't look long enough to get it. So do it as a sticker. Oh, did that happen to you? Yeah. So you just keep that at home. But here's the thing about Black Lives Matter. And I explained this in my slideshow. If I have a bumper sticker on the back of my car that says "Save the Rainforest," it does not mean screw the other forests. It means the rainforests are being cut down and we have to do something about them. So that's how I explain Black Lives Matter. So it's not like being selfish. We understand that all lives matter, but other people's lives aren't getting shot down by police all the time. So,
Alex, question?
Oh, yeah.
Hello, Mr. Knight. I've loved your work for years, and it's so exciting to meet you. I'm just wondering what we should expect aesthetically from your new show, because I'm imagining like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit situation. But
Oh, no.
I can go forward to some, because we have some pictures on here, so I can.
Oh, some pictures of the show?
Yeah, because you sent them and demanded it.
Okay. Yeah. So that's me in a recreation of my San Francisco apartment, which is very exciting. We're shooting it up in Vancouver.
And you're leaving right after this.
Yeah, literally flying back to the set right after this. And on the other side is our production office, and they made it all fancy with I'm going to steal those framed cartoons when all is said and done.
And that's Maya Angelou and Gil Scott Heron, right?
Yeah. And so, what to expect? Whereas everything is something from the K Chronicles, right? So there's the fam on set, and there's some of the stars. It's Blake Anderson from Workaholics, Lamar Morris from New Girl, that's Rose McIver from iZombie, Sashir Zamata from Saturday Night Live, and T Murph from T Murph. This is his first show, so he's super excited. So anyway, everything comes out from the K Chronicles. So the K Chronicles, the nightlife is sort of the kiddie version of the K Chronicles. So it was in a mainstream newspaper, took out all the blue stuff, the family's in it, it's very family friendly. This is the opposite of that. So it's going to be the adult version of the K Chronicles. So it's younger, like it's skewed younger, 18 to 34 type stuff.
Does that mean I can't watch it?
You, I wouldn't. I'm not going to say how it tested, but it tested well with a very certain demographic that you may not fit in. But, and also, like, we don't use a lot of animation. It's not like Roger, it's mostly live action. So we use the animation, and I can't really get into what the animation is, because that's part of the fun of it. But I guarantee you've not seen it before, and I guarantee that some of the parents will be like, you can't watch this. Let's just say that. But it will be smart and funny.
Okay, next question. Go ahead.
One question, how do you protect your work from getting copied? How do you
I can't. Well, I mean, obviously you can get your stuff. There's a poor man's copyright, but you can send your stuff off for it to be copywritten and all this stuff. But here's the thing. If someone's ripping off your stuff in any public sort of way, they will be called out for it and they will be blackballed. I've had people, there was one person that I know consciously ripped off my stuff, and I've never heard from him again. And not that I had him taken out or anything, it's just that when it came down to him trying to create something, he just never went beyond a certain thing. Yeah, and then I remember catching somebody else and calling him out on it, and he's like, oh, I didn't realize I might have seen it, but I don't know, it's just like, it usually gets around if someone's ripping somebody off, and they usually get blackballed, but honestly, like, no one makes enough money in this business to be like, it's not even worth it, It's not even worth it. It's not even worth it. Just create. Don't worry about anyone copying. If you're doing stuff that's good enough to copy, then you're going to be okay. You're going to be doing all right. So just keep on doing what you're doing.
And we have a question over here.
Yes.
You talked about your love of newspapers. Do you subscribe to the Raleigh or the Durham paper now?
I absolutely do not. I just pick, I read them at the library. I support my local library. I almost started to subscribe to the New York Times, and then they dropped the cartoon from their international day.
Right.
For it's just like
It was a stupid reason.
yeah, it was a real silly reason,
Yeah.
and so I.
One controversy involved.
Yeah. I try to support like writers and cartoonists, people on Patreon. I have a list of creators that I support and things like that. I want to support politicians that will get. I think there really needs to be a recreation. We need to go back when you couldn't be a corporation and own multiple media outlets. You couldn't own a TV station and a newspaper in the same market. Yeah, because it really is destroying. There are so many businesses and jobs that are being lost because of that, because of all this consolidation. That's one of the reasons why we are where we're at. Honestly, just the media itself, the fact that we're not calling people out on stuff is one of the biggest problems of what's going on today. If someone is blatantly lying, report that they're lying. Just say, this person is lying right now, and these are the reasons why I think they're trying to deceive the American people. That should be it. It shouldn't be, let's have this person, it's raining outside. Okay, we're gonna have someone who thinks it's raining outside, we're gonna have someone, just to have someone to go against them who doesn't believe it's raining outside. Like, you shouldn't just have two people arguing about whether it's raining outside. You should open the window and say, it is raining outside. And we have just confirmed it. And it's raining outside. So don't waste the time debating it, you know?
All right, so any more questions?
One more question.
Sorry.
One more question.
Rant.
Yes.
I found your topic around Black folks' legacy in this country is kind of being the invisible people with invisible accomplishments. When you really know the history, it's quite contrary, to that.
Oh, yeah.
As you look at, kind of internalizing that, and then trying to project how you deal with that issue in your work, how is that received, especially as you try to find mainstream outlets to better tell, that message? Obviously, we don't want to appear as being ranting and being angry, but the message somehow needs to be told broadly. I mean, we have a Holocaust museum. Every year, there's a piece done on, that history. But I very rarely see, outlets for our history.
Well, I mean, obviously, we need to come to, America needs to come to terms with that. And so, when I mean America, white people need to come to terms with the fact that there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable conversations. Like, right now, the discussion on, say, reparations or race in the country only goes as far as when white people feel uncomfortable, which is 5.2 seconds. So that's as far as it goes. And it needs to go farther than that. But as far as the way it's been received for me, I'm sitting here in the Library of Congress doing an interview. Like, I am traveling around the country doing slideshows. I am going to have a TV show on Hulu. I think it's being received really well, and maybe it's because the way I do it is through humor and through, it has to go down with some medicine, like a little bit of sugar goes down. But I think people want to know this stuff. I just think we were just talking about it earlier. There are really basic, simple things that need to change in this country. And one of the things is, when white people talk about, say, black, when they say black people, they tend to whisper it because they learn that black means bad all the time. So when seriously, most white people go, and it's, first, just be able to say it. Just say it. Black is okay. Black is beautiful. Black, just say it. It's a positive thing. Once you get, and don't feel like you're afraid to engage people in these conversations, because the reason why you don't hear about this stuff, because people always say, I work with all these black folks, and they go, I work with all these folks, and they don't say anything, they don't complain to me. And it's like, why? Because they generally they are working for you, and they are not in the position to say anything bad. These conversations need to happen in I don't know if it's in a more comfortable space. And we were talking about a safe space for folks to talk about this stuff. It's really hard. This specialist, I read about this diversity specialist that goes into workplaces. And she says she goes into workplaces, and even when they're supposed to talk about this stuff, people of color won't talk about it in their workplace. And the people that feel the most comfortable are white people who are like, I don't understand why I can't because white people feel comfortable everywhere. There's no place where you can't feel comfortable. And she says, at the end, people of color will come up to her and say, I'd like to talk, but once you're gone, I'm still in this workplace. And people are just like, so I heard you complaining at this thing. All the power is this country is a white space. And I don't even know how to explain that. Even when people come up to me and they go, I was on the bus and I was like the only white person there. I felt like what it's like to be in Miami. No, you don't. Like, you have to grow up never reading about your accomplishments in this country. You have to turn on the TV and always see someone else as the protagonist, as the hero. You have to like have all this stuff carried on you before you ever even feel for a moment like you're a minority in this country. Because if you call 911 on that bus and the cops show up, you're gonna be the safest person there. So once people have that idea, that sort of grasp, then we can start to kind of move forward, you know? And it's gonna take a long time, but yeah, I'll just say one last thing. I did a talk in my hometown, Malden, Massachusetts, because the whole city was given the book The Hate You Give as a book to read in all the schools. And I was just happy because when I was growing up, I got more books where the protagonists were animals, where the heroes were animals than people of color. Call of the Wild, you know, Animal Farm, Beowulf. I got nothing where there were people of color as heroes. So I was just happy that they're finally getting books like that where people of color are the protagonists. And I got an email 2 weeks later from the commissioner of Malden schools. And he said, I never thought of that. Never thought of it that way. And that's the thing, like, that's why you need to have diversity in your workplace, diversity on your board, and diversity, because it's not white people's fault. It's just, it's completely out of their, but you gotta understand, like, your view is not the be all end all. And so, in order to make this country live up to its ideals, diversity counts. When you say, I don't see color, that is an insult, because that means you're purposely forcing yourself not to see it because you think it's a detrimental thing. You should be embracing the idea of seeing color. You should be embracing the idea of seeing differences and different perspectives. So embrace that. And I mean that for everybody and across the board, not just color or, you know, race, but gender and age and through class, like people who have a lot of money and don't have a lot of money. Like, there are perspectives that we all need to, I'm just giving you a certain perspective, but we all have stories to tell. And so value those stories and immerse yourself in different stories.
And on that, Keith Knight.